And welcome back to Driver's Talk. Rick Titus, Jay Dalton, and a gentleman I probably don't need to introduce, but I'll do it anyway. And this, of course, is Jay Leno. Jay, thank you for having us here in your garage.
Well, thanks for coming to the garage. We appreciate it.
Jay, we walked through your garage now, which, by the way, is a privilege to do, and I'm blown away at the diversity of what you've collected.
There's no rhyme or reason to it. I tend to like noble failures. I like cars that were maybe better in their time than they needed to be, or were more than the public wanted. You know, I have next door a Will St. Clair, child Harold Wills, and he was Ford's metallurgist. And he developed a planetary transmission, vanadium steel. You know, Ford didn't like to give credit to anybody. Ford said he found a piece of steel in France. And,
Here we go.
No, but yeah, and he also did the Ford script, you know, the blue oval, which they still use today. And he was an engineer's engineer, and he, like everybody, worked for Henry Ford. They had a huge fight, and I guess about 1913 or so, whatever, he took his stock, which was at this point $10 million, and started building his own car. And the Will St. Clair is an overhead cam, well, single overhead cam on each side, bevel drive, V8 in 1920. And Ford told him, nobody's going to go 70 miles an hour. You know, nobody needs a car that goes that fast. You don't need it, you know. But he wanted to build, he built a factory, and he had universal health care, and you lived in his housing, and if you lost your job, you could stay in the, I mean, all these things were just not sustainable.
Yeah.
And he built them for about 4 or 5 years, and they were wonderful cars, and they're genuine classics. It's just that, well, it's a noble failure.
Yeah.
The Duesenberg, same thing. I mean, the Duesenberg was what, probably $17,000 when a Ford was $260. Isn't that crazy? You're in the middle of the Depression, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I like all those things that didn't quite get there because the builder or the designer or the engineer put their heart and soul into it when they just should have put their business head into it.
Exactly, you know? Right.
Have you ever been tempted by other cars that failed, like a Davis? A three-wheel Davis.
The Davis is interesting. There weren't enough of them around. Growing up on the East Coast, we didn't see that stuff. You know, you'd sit in math class with your Hot Rod magazine, you know, reading about all these kind of unusual sort of cars. I mean, yeah, the Davis is interesting, and if I came across one, it would be a fun car to do, but no, I never had a Davis.
But that leads me to the question I wanted to ask you. All right, you become a celebrity, you're doing the Tonight Show, you're starting to make some good money now.
Right.
There's the immediate list of cars you've wanted since you were a kid. Is that the first stuff you acquired?
It's the opportunity or it's the story that sells you on the car. I mean, the one thing I've found, no matter what you're looking for anywhere in the world, it's probably within 50 miles of LA. I mean, because this is where Lockheed and all the engineers, and everybody just came here, especially in between World War I and World War II. This was the growing place. So all the interesting cars came here, and consequently they lasted a long time because of, they didn't rust out and the sunshine and all. I mean, you know, a buddy of mine came out that I went to high school with, he goes, boy, a lot of classics around here. I go, no, people in Burbank, that guy's still driving a 65 Buick because it still runs.
It was his.
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
He
I mean,
likes that car.
He doesn't, I'm sure he thinks of it a classic, kind of, but to him it's just a car, you know. And that's what's sort of fun about being here. So a lot of times it's opportunity, and then once I get it, I kind of go, oh, that's interesting, you know. But there are certain ones. I've always been a Duesenberg fan. That was always the greatest American classic. You know, all Duesenbergs were built in 1928, every single one.
Oh, I did not realize it was
28
here.
and 29.
Okay.
And then the Depression hit, and it took 10 years to get rid of them. And they would change the wheel covers and a few other things. But by the late 30s, although the engine was magnificent, the rest of it was getting a little long in the tooth, you know. Cadillac had the V16 and the low-slung styling, and the Duesenberg had to hustle a bit to catch up.
The motorcycle thing, where did that come from? Because you've got a lot of bikes here, and I know you've had a strong interest in that for a long time.
Well, anything that rolls, explodes, and makes noise is something I like, you know. I mean, when I first came to California, I realized I could put 6 or 7 motorcycles in one parking space. So, oh, this is kind of a fun thing to collect. And if you like mechanical things, you know, motorcycles are exoskeletons. They wear their uniqueness on the outside, you know. I had a friend of mine who collected Maytag washing machine motors, but only up to about, let's say, 1911. Because prior to that, the engine was outside, next to the agitator. So consequently, it was in the home, so it had to be pretty. It had a lot of nickel, a lot of copper, and when it ran, you'd see things move, and you'd see the little arm move the agitator, And it was just interesting. This is what people did before Netflix. You know, you go and you kind of watch the mechanical thing move. And then somebody came along and said, let's just put a big white box over it.
Yeah.
And, well, why spend money on copper and nickel? No one's going to see it. It's the same reason I think kids today are not interested in cars. You open the hood of a car now, and there's usually a big sheet of plastic, and you pull that out with the 4 prongs, and then there's just a lot of hoses and wires, you know. I mean, we come from the era of the engine dress-up kit, you know. Guys would, before they went out, they'd make sure there were no smudges on their chrome valve covers, you know, so when you open it, ooh, ah, you know, it was mechanically interesting to look at, and you could see what every little part did, you know.
Jay, I want to thank you for giving us this time.
Well, thanks,
It was
guys.
hard to
Thank
come
you.
by.
Thanks for taking the time, gentlemen. Thank you.
We're going to go to break right now, but when we come back, our segment called Hit the Gas or Sniffing Gas.